And Jessica seems nice. Don't sit too far to the side. Because I want to be able to see everybody. Don't sit too far to the side. There we go. Well, the Siddurim, if you just have a Siddur near, you should have one near you anyway, because you're in sanctuary. They should be relatively nearby. You've seen one of these before? As much as I'm a diehard Yankee fan, I don't think baseball merits a blessing. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, they do. They do. They're amazing. Yeah. The starters haven't given up a run in 4 games. Lisa, you have a copy? All right. So I apologize for any of the confusion on the dates. The error was 100% mine, not Karen in the marketing department. I'm glad you're here this morning, but error is 100% mine. I just completely looked at the calendar wrong. So even though I had written the dates, I then announced different dates. It's wonderful. It's good. It's good to get old. And it's good to be able to blame everything on getting old. That's the key. Yes. So we're sitting here in a sanctuary. What about the sanctuary makes it easier to pray? You can pray anywhere in the world, obviously. We all know that. What about the sanctuary makes it easier? It's quiet. Community. It's contained. Bingo. All right, so on top of everything everybody said, that's exactly it. You associate it already so that your mindset as you walk in the door is different than when you walk into Yankee Stadium, okay? I walk in, I have a different expectation of myself as I walk in the door. Certain environments lend themselves better, good morning, to prayer. So for example, if you think back, if you've been to camp, you know, and you've seen Havdalah at the water, you go to the lake, and the lake just creates that environment for you by association. I've heard the name God invoked, but it hasn't been pleasant. It's been, oh God. So the reality is we set aside special places, not that the place inherently has any extra kedusha or any extra access to God. It's in our heads that it has that extra access. We set it aside. The same thing in terms of a particular place. Most of us, when you come into the sanctuary, will go sit in a particular seat. There's even a term for that in Hebrew. We call it your makom kavui. It's a place you go that's yours, in a sense. And as you sit down in that seat, it gets you into the mindset of prayer. There are studies that show the power of that. If you can figure out how to go and study in the seat that you're going to take the test in, they show it improves results. It's on a significant statistical level, okay? And so literally your mind, you create a mindset in a particular location that helps you get to a certain kind of thinking. All right, so that's the major advantage of the sanctuary, because as I said to you, you could go anywhere and pray. We all know that. The reality of it is, though, our minds turn to prayer when we walk in this door.
Is it kind of like for teenagers when they take the test for driving, you should take it in the car you're driving?
Yeah, for sure. It's absolutely the same thing. Absolutely. So as you, just a couple pieces of how do we get there? How do we get our minds there? As you walk in the sanctuary, I read this a number of years ago, take a second, stop at the door. Stop at the door and just leave everything outside. Consciously make that decision to leave all the shtick of life outside the door and start afresh as you walk in. Resolve to put it all away. Sit in the same location as I just said. It turns your mind by habit to prayer. Try to find a seat where you're not surrounded by talkers. Okay? It's very hard to get deeper and deeper into a mindset of prayer when people around you are sharing with you either the stock market or whatever else is going on. There's an old cartoon about, getting your high holiday tickets or your specific seats. Do you want to sit in the baseball section? Do you want to sit in the stock section? Where do you want to sit? Okay? So try to find away from people that you know tend to be talkers so that you can get into a deeper place. When you put your talit over your head, and women, I encourage this too, because I honestly believe that equal opportunity means equal obligation. Everybody should, if we're going to be equal, let's do it. Okay? My mom would probably slap me at this point, but that's, what's that? That also would be equal. Right. So when you put it over your head, you'll see me, you'll see others, put it over the head and bring it down in a sense over, and give yourself a second or two before you lift it up. Try to sense in a way God's presence descending upon you. It's all mental gymnastics, I understand that. But you're creating a mindset that makes it easier to engage in prayer. Good morning. I'm going to read these back here. So do that, and then the other thing is, and I've talked about this last week as well, control where you're looking. I talked to you about closing my eyes because there's nothing more distracting than a human face. At the end of the day, we turn to people. It's a natural instinct. It's a good thing, except when you don't want to. Right? Then you really have to control it, because there's nothing more likely to take you out of a mindset of prayer and God than the person that you just see and you want to wave at. Okay? It's not disrespectful to them. Right now, its focus is God. You have the kiddish, you'll be able to chat. No problem. Okay? It's one of the reasons they say put your eyes down on the prayer book. It's also so that you don't make mistakes, but also if you're looking at the prayer book, you're not looking at everybody around you. Okay? The goal essentially is, even before you start your prayers, you're trying to create an atmosphere for yourself that increases your odds of getting to that place of connection. It's not easy. All that we bring to the table, we're trying to leave outside, trying to walk in and create godliness. It doesn't happen easily. So in terms of the prayers, when people are singing, when we're leading and doing a congregation melody, sing it. Bring it. Fill the room with sound. When it's a silent section, say the words with your mouth. And just loud enough for yourself to hear. I remember one of my Spanish teachers would say to us, when you're memorizing the words, say them out loud, practicing out loud. You hear them, you're using more senses, and it sticks with you. Okay? All right? And then, as the goal at the end of the day is to step out of our own needs and our own selves and to put ourselves in a place that is godly in a way. And so Heschel, I've given you Heschel reading number 1. I think it's on the back. Somebody read it nice and loudly. Please.
The self is not the hub, but the spoke of the revolving wheel. In prayer, we shift the focus of good
there's a tendency to come and say, all right, now I'm going to focus on me in prayer. And that's exactly, Heschel is saying, that's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. Get out of you. All right? Focus on the connection with God instead. All right. So everybody should have a prayer book. All we've done so far is create the mood. Sam, I think there's some extra copies of the handout over here. Oh, you got one. Good. Okay. Turn to page 101. All right. On 101, we have Matovu. And I'm going to read the text in the English there. How lovely are your dwellings, Jacob. How lovely. Matovu. Your sanctuaries, people of Israel. As for me, by the way, that's from Numbers. The rest of this paragraph is taken from different Psalms. And it says, as for me, through your great kindness, I enter your house. In awe of you, I bow toward your holy sanctuary. Adonai, I love your house, the place where your glory dwells. I will bow and prostrate myself, kneel before Adonai, my creator. My prayers are to you, Adonai, in the hope that this is a favorable time. God, in your abundant love, respond to me with faithful deliverance. These are the words that traditionally you would say as you enter the synagogue. So you sit down, you close your eyes, you get into the place. This is how you start. Okay? And so, I gave you the structure. This opening verse, Matovu Alecha, is from Bilam. It's from the book of Numbers. Bilam is a prophet hired by a king. The Israelites are marching through the desert. And the king sees that they're conquering everybody along the way. And the king goes to one of the non-Jewish prophets that's out there, apparently has some predicting skills or whatever, blessing skills. And he says to him, I want you to curse the people. And so he reluctantly, after 35 attempts, he keeps saying no, 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 no. And then finally God comes to him and says, you have to do this. And he goes, and instead of cursing the people, as he stands out and he looks out upon them, he says, Matovu alecha Yaakov, how good. Never mind a curse, now it's a blessing. Out of the words of a foreign prophet come words of blessing about the community. And so that is how we start out. Good morning, welcome. The other thing to note is what predominates in this prayer is the word I. It keeps showing up. I mentioned this last week. The entire service is in the we, with the exception of Matovu. We enter as individuals, and then the next place I shows up is the last three stanzas of Adon Olam as you're leaving. All right? Adonai li v'lo ira. The Lord is mine. It shifts in the middle of Adon Olam from the plural to the singular. Okay, so you start as an individual, you leave as an individual, and everything in between is our. It's communal needs. It's about us. Right. It's not right. It's not part of the morning service technically. It's something you say as you enter individually. All right, what you're going to see as a general pattern is a lot of it became recited collectively, even though it's in the singular. A lot of this became recited because people were illiterate. We tend to think that Jews of the Middle Ages and before were very literate and therefore they knew their stuff. That's not necessarily the case. And the rabbis started instituting communally ways of saying things communally because the people weren't as literate as we think. And so Matovu became part of a service in a sense, but it really is an individualistic kind of thing. We understand the imagery of what's going on because he's looking down, Bilam is looking down on the tents. How lovely are your tents? He's looking down from above on the tents. If you look at a congregation, everybody's putting their talis on and covering their heads. If you look down upon them, it looks like everybody set up a tent. Right? There's this imagery of what's going on that plays out. All right. Let's now go to where we start our service, page 103. You'll recognize lots of blessings here. 103. An overview, and then we'll take each of the blessings individually as to what's going on. Okay? First of all, you have this, praise are you, blessed are you, whatever the word you want to use for Baruch, over and over and over. Here it's 15 times. It is part of the ritual of a Jewish life to recite blessings no matter what's going on. Throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year, The sages taught that experiences of life are elevated through the connection between them and the blessing of God. We elevate eating. Every animal eats. We elevate that same experience by attributing a connection to God in process. We take it out of the animalistic and make it kedusha, and make it holy. Yes, absolutely. A lot of this is creating a way of connection, and that is all mindfulness. All right? The bracha is meant to bring us closer to God in our usual routines. I think there's some copies, should be right there, okay? No phenomenon is too ordinary. No phenomenon is too extraordinary to be without blessing. There are blessings for sex. There are blessings for going to the bathroom. There are blessings. It doesn't matter what your life is. There's a way of saying there's a connection to God in this process. Interestingly, the word baruch, right, it's a word we really don't do well with translating. First of all, it's in the passive form. It's is blessed or is praised. Anytime you see the uval, it's going to be, it's telling you this is a passive verb. The uval tells you passivity. All right? But it comes from the word berech. Berech means knee. If you think when we say baruch, many times what we do is bend the knee. What does bowing or bending the knee when you're before a sovereign imply? It's submission. It's a status statement of I'm standing before. I'm lowering myself in your presence. And that's really what is meant by the word. Well, we don't have a translation for baruch that really works. The mindset is I'm standing before a God. I'm in God's presence and I'm lowering myself in that balance. I'm creating a hierarchy just through the word baruch. That's really what's being implied. All right? Surprise anybody? No, it's God is blessed. Right. Yes. We are blessed to be in God's presence, but it's God who is blessed. Okay? Yes, sir. Submission. There are a lot of commonalities. The more I read about the Middle Ages, the more I realize there's a lot of commonalities in the way Jews and Muslims have thought. Very much distinct from Christianity. Islam and Judaism are far closer, far more focused on behaviors than theology. Right? Where Christianity is a full theology, neither Islam or Judaism really is. Yeah. So the Talmud lists out this set of blessings that one would say in the morning. They were said at home. These blessings were originally said at home as part of the routine act of getting ready for your day. Waking and arising and reestablishing your identity and dressing and getting ready for your daily affairs. Each of your routines in the morning was accompanied by a blessing that would connect. They recognize God's role in everything we're doing. Since the 9th century, Rabbi Amram, right around the time that the Siddur was really being finalized in the 9th century, all right, he ruled at that point that these became part of the service in the synagogue, again, because of illiteracy. Rabbi Amram. Okay? 9th century, again, illiteracy. People did not know the blessings for the first time, and so he recognized that and made it part of the communal service. But they actually are meant to be done at home. This was the Ashkenazic response, and it's what we do. But in the Sephardic world, Maimonides ruled plain and simply, 300 years later, it still needs to be done at home instead. It shouldn't be done as part of the service. That's reading number 2. Somebody, let's just... So just in case you think I'm crazy, take a look in your Siddur on page 103. about 8 or 9 lines down from the top, it says that all I did was quote right out of it's Maimonides, but they also quoted Maimonides. You have these, what you've got in this Siddur is a lot of learning about the service is built in. That's where it says, Maimonides stated, these brachot are without a prescribed order. So what would happen in the morning is there's not we know the sequence. You do this blessing, then that blessing. We've kind of routinized it. He is saying that that's not the way it is. Depends on what you're doing and what sequence in the morning. Each blessing attaches to an action. If you shave before you brush your teeth, then you would say the blessing's one way. If you brush your teeth before you shave, you'd say the blessing's in a different order. I'm using that as an example. Okay? Each of us has sort of, I promise you, when you get up in the morning, you go into the bathroom and get ready, you probably have a sequence with you never break. Okay? And it's probably different for all of us. The blessings were meant to be associated with your personal sequence of routines in the morning. Okay. So that's the first thing in our prayer book I want you to see. Okay. Let's look at the specific blessings now. What they've done here in the English, I love that they decided not to waste too much space, and so they translated Baruch Atah once, and then gave you the sort of the ending. So Baruch Atah, but notice they don't translate it. They don't translate Baruch. Is it praised? Is it blessed? Is it whatever? It's Ni. All right. Baruch Atah Adonai, our God, Eloheinu. Melech is a king or a sovereign of time and space, because the word olam we would say the universe. But the universe implies everything in space, but olam also implies eternity. It's everything, time and space, okay? So we have that part down. We're all experts in Baruch Atahs. Okay. So the first one then comes along and it says, Asher Natan Lasechvi Vina, who has given the rooster the understanding, the wisdom, Lahavchin, to distinguish bein yom, between day, uvein laila, and night. Because they're not 100% sure it's a rooster. There's a whole Talmudic discussion on it. All right. It's a good question, and the rabbis played that they weren't sure. All right, but the reality of it is it's a rooster. Unless you know of another animal that's out crowing in the morning, it's a rooster. Right. So they didn't have alarm clocks. Think about the first thing you're aware of that wakens you to the new day is your alarm clock. Okay? But I've been on a kibbutz. You don't get to wait for the alarm clock. The rooster's out there screaming hours before your alarm clock goes off. As I've said on many occasions, I've been sitting there in that room. My first thought was, oh my God, there's Shabbos dinner, get me a gun. Okay? What's that? Yeah, no, right. Right. It's exactly. It wakens you to a new day. It's a start of an awareness that there are wonders set up in nature, that God has set up the universe in such a way as to be productive for our use. Okay? That rooster is more than just crowing. It's a representation of God's presence in nature. This particular, it's taken from a verse in Job where God is castigating Job at the end of the story and saying to him, you don't know, what do you know from anything? You know, you're questioning my wisdom. And he says, this is God who's saying to him, who gave the cunning rooster its ability to distinguish? You don't know from such things. I did this. So it's a direct quote right out of Job. It's meant to take you back to say God knows how the world works. We don't. The other thing that's being subtly implied here is if you're deaf, the rooster is irrelevant. Right? Think about it. Well, you're not going to hear vibrations in your room, right? All right. If you're deaf, the rooster is irrelevant. And so there is an understanding that in the morning when you wake up, hearing has returned. Because for the rabbis, sleeping was 1/60th the equivalent of death. It's as if you have disappeared from the universe and you wake up the next morning and there is return of all the gifts of life. And so even though it's not mentioning hearing, it's implying without hearing, the rooster doesn't matter. Yes. Yes, yeah. Asher Yatzar is done earlier. Yes. The rabbis understood that waking up in the morning is a prelude, conceptually, to resurrection. All right? As if you were dead. And so therefore life should not be taken for granted, and every day is new and a gift. Questions on the rooster? You got the rooster down? Asher natan lasechvi. What's that? Okay. Second, and third, and fourth blessings. All right, we have here, She'asani b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim, in the image, who has made me in his image. She'asani ben or bat chorin, who has made me a free man or woman. And She'asani Yisrael, who has made me a Jew. Yes. I'll get there. Right, I'll get there. You're absolutely right. There are originally, as Gail just said, if you look in an Orthodox Siddur, if you look in a Siddur prior, and even a conservative prior to 1945, what you will find is blessings like this in the negative. It will say, Shelo asani goy, who has not made me a non-Jew. Shelo asani aved, who has not made me a slave. And Shelo asani isha, who has not made me a woman. That's the traditional blessings that are here. The sequence. Yeah, they changed the sequencing. And the sequencing here is very important. And I'll tell you why. I'm not sure why they did that. It's obviously, it has all the echoes of chauvinism. Clearly. You say, thank you, God didn't make me a woman. A woman would say instead, She'asani kirtzono, who made me according to his desire. All right? So the men would say, thank you for not making me a woman. And the women would say, thank you for making me according to your desire. And you can write all your chauvinistic jokes right here. Just place them in a box and we'll go from there. But in reality, that wasn't, yes. You can. You can. You can say that. There's nothing wrong with it. But it wasn't in its original intent chauvinistic. Although it clearly is today in its original. Please let me finish. You can't keep saying, right. Let me keep, all right? I don't want you to, if you're going to offer information, that's not helping me. All right? If you have a question, that I'll take. Okay, good. So the way the blessings were sent, remember I said to you, it's first, hasn't made me a Gentile. The second is, who hasn't made me a slave. And the third, who hasn't made me a woman, in that sequence. What is significant about the sequence is the number of commandments that each is obligated to. So who has not made me a non-Jew, the non-Jew is only obligated to the 7 commandments of Noah. Out of the 613, only obligated to 7. The slave is only obligated not to do the negative things. They have no so 248 commandments remain in place upon the slave. 7 on the non-Jew, 7 on the slave. For a woman, it's all but about 20. So 593 are obligated upon women. And so what you see here is it's about blessing the sense of obligation. That's what's going on here. And the sequence is telling you that it goes from 7 to 300 to 248 to 590 something. It's not meant chauvinistically in its original intent, although I'm not suggesting we go back and say them. That's not my intent. But its original understanding was a celebration of obligation to mitzvah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay? Now, one of the things to note is we are very highly influenced by the cultures around us. We always have been. In the Greek world, these blessings were really written sometime in Mishnaic times, in the 2nd or 3rd century. The Greeks predate that. They don't predate Judaism, but they predate the blessings. A central tenet of the ancient Greek world was faith in the superiority of Greeks over all others. And Socrates used to say there are 3 blessings for which he is grateful to fortune. That I was born a person and not a beast. That I was born a man and not a woman. That I was born a Greek and not a barbarian. You hear echoes here. In the Cairo Geniza, we find a similar text thanking God, who made me a person and not a beast, made me a man and not a woman, made me an Israelite and not a Gentile, who makes me one who circumcises others and is not uncircumcised myself. That's a negative way of saying it. Who is circumcised, and who made me free and not a slave. It is clear the Greek influence on the Siddur and rabbinic thought. Okay? Now I want to go, we've dealt with the women's issue to some extent. I want to go on to Shelo Asani Goy, who has not made me a Goy. In Hebrew, the word Goy is not pejorative. It doesn't carry any of the negativity of the Yiddish. When you say it in Yiddish, my mom would say it in Yiddish, it wasn't said with love. Okay, and I used to take her to task for it, and she was, oh no, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you knew what I'm talking about. Love mom, but that generation had a different mindset. Plain and simply, she fit into the generation. It wasn't about her. In the biblical Hebrew, Goy essentially denotes a nation that is attached to a territory, including Israel. So we talk in one of our prayers talks about Israel as a Goy Kadosh, as a holy nation. The term applies to Jews just as much as anybody else in the Hebrew. That's not true in the Yiddish, but it is a term of nation status. In the 13th century, the Christian leaders began charging that the Talmud blasphemes Christianity. And you have the burning of the Talmud and all sorts of other discussions about the Talmud and confrontations about the Talmud, etc. Among other things, they charged that the word Goy meant Christian in particular, not simply a non-Jew. And the blessing, who did not make me a Goy, therefore, was particularly offensive to them, if that's how you interpret it. By the way, I'm not sure that it wasn't meant that way in those times because, again, Jews fought back. They have no military strength. They had no ability to fight back, and so they used polemic. It was their way of fighting back. But that wasn't the intent of the blessing as it was written. Nonetheless, in February of 1234 in Paris, 12,000 Jewish books are burned in response to all of this. 30 years later in 1263, Pope Clement IV allows the books to return, provided the offensive parts are removed, and there's a censorship. Somebody is actually looking at what's left and making sure it's all good and not offensive. 300 years later, Pope Leo X orders that all books be submitted to a censor prior to publication, and there's an edict resulting in the first index of forbidden books. This is just in the larger picture. Rather than lose access to Jewish texts, Jews adapted, and they took out what was perceived as offensive. Whether or not it was intended that way, it was perceived that way. Yes. Edom, right, Edom. Right. Edom became Christian Rome. Right. It was. Well, that's exactly where I'm going to go in a second. It's essentially, it was a word that was. Think of the book 1984. Right. The animals really represented different political positions. Edom, as an ancient land, was far less offensive to cite and to cite what they're really intending. All right. So it's symbolic. So the Jews did exactly that, and they engaged, in a sense, a very dangerous subterfuge. Instead of a word that was in this index that wasn't allowed, They actually would use a word that's far more offensive, but wasn't in the book. It wasn't in the list of words that couldn't be used. An example, instead of saying, who has not made me a goy, they put in there, who has not made me an ignoramus. Now, it's not in the list of words that can't be used, but every Jew knew exactly what was going on. All right? It's far more offensive, actually, a lot more offensive. But they put in a word that didn't show up in the book, and so the censorship let it happen. All right? I don't know about stupid, but it wasn't in the list, and I'm not sure how much time they were really investing in making sure it all played out. In the 1854 Siddur, in the Reform movement, they actually, of these three blessings of identification, Abraham Geiger put in one blessing in all three that said, She'asani le'ovdo, who has made me one of God's servants. That's to serve him. The three blessings in the positive that we have today, really, we didn't just come up with them. They are Talmudically based. And if you look at Sim Shalom 103, at the bottom, who said, who made me in the divine image. There, you can read there, this blessing and the next one, who made me free, are versions of blessings mentioned in the Tosefta and in the Babylonian Talmud. They have been amended in conservative prayer books on the basis of manuscript fragments found in the Cairo Geniza. And so, it's not just some random, oftentimes when we make a change to the Siddur, just making it without any precedent is not an acceptable alternative. They found a precedent within Talmud to do so. Okay? And wording that justifies it. Okay, so now I've given you two places in the Siddur to look every time you come in and kind of remind you what's going on. All right, we're now up to the fourth one. Who gives sight to the blind. Well, much like hearing, you get up in the morning, overnight, most of us don't see much. We may think we see it in our dreams and things like that, but our eyes are not working, and there's an appreciation for the fact that once we get up in the morning, vision has returned. It's not true for every human being in the universe. There are people who wake up and don't see. So it's time to stop and be appreciative. We thank God for restoring the ability to see. And a very interesting note, the rabbis ruled that even a blind person still says this blessing because it's meant in the collective. Obviously, somebody addressed them and said, do we say this or not? And so that was the conclusion they reached. When we thank God for giving sight to the blind, it's not just the literal gift of sight. So look at 103 in the upper right-hand, upper left-hand column over the English. When we thank God for giving sight to the blind, we express thankfulness not only for the literal gift of sight, but also for our capacity for insight, for our ability to be aware of the world around us, and for the capacity to understand ourselves and our world. It's been fascinating. My notes all these years, I've had all these and a lot of these things in there, and suddenly I showed that they've just put them in the prayer book, and so great. I mean, they have the same sources that I'm working with, so it's not a surprise. Okay? So again, I want to point out these places in the Siddur where it's meant to inspire you and to make connections about what the prayers really are about. The next one, who clothes the naked. This was said when you got dressed. All right? So all the others are, you're still laying in bed. I'm aware of who I am. I've got hearing. I've got sight. Now I'm getting dressed. This was said in the morning for the gift of clothing. It's also a biblical allusion. If you look back to the story of the Garden of Eden, who clothes Adam and Eve? God. God provides the clothing. And so there's meant to be an allusion here that people would pick up on. Even in being exiled, even in being thrown out of the Garden of Eden, God still attends to their needs. Okay? Isaiah mentions clothing the naked as one of the moral actions of God that God expects of us. It's clothing the naked, it's feeding the hungry, it's tending to the homelessness. This is what Isaiah lays out for us. Okay? So this is one of those three. So then let's go to the next one, flip the page. Who releases the bound, who straightens those who are bent. Hamatir asurim. Now asurim really are prisoners. A beit asur is a prison. So it's like at night you're bound up and you can't move. And you wake up in the morning and suddenly what's the first thing you do? Right? You stretch. It's like you've been released from prison in a sense. The next one is Zokef Kefufim, who straightens those who are doubled over. So you're standing up.
Okay. So you're saying that, they did change the order.
Yes.
You're getting dressed, you're out of bed. What you're talking about now, clearly you're back in bed.
Well, you're getting out. You're right. The one about you're right.
I mean, why shouldn't the naked be if they're changing the order anyway?
You would think getting out of bed, you're not getting dressed in bed. Right, that would be the assumption. I cannot tell you. But again, if you remember what Maimonides said, they should be said in the order in which you actually are doing, right? All right? So why they've made it in the synagogue in a different sequence, I'm not sure I can answer that. It's a good question. Very good. Could be. But both of these essentially are also, we've talked about hearing and sight. Both of these are also blessings about mobility. The ability to move. We're appreciating all of our different. Anybody who has been bedridden realizes the miraculous nature of the neurological and the muscular and the skeletal structure that allows one to stand up. And anytime you go for physical therapy because something ain't working. So anybody who hasn't been to physical therapy, you don't get to answer. You're too young. Anybody who's over the age of 20 who hasn't gone for physical therapy of some sort, it's not unlikely. Our bodies have moments where they're less than happy. All right? There's a miracle to the fact that isn't our everyday reality. Although as you get older, you wake up in the morning and say, what's not working today? It's a little different. I'm sure you've all recognized this. The other thing to note in the Zokef Kefufim, it echoes a line in the Ashrei. There it says, Somech Adonai l'chol hanoflim v'zokef l'chol hakfufim. All right? That God supports all those in the noflim are the fallen, v'zokef, and uplifts those who are doubled over. And out of that, the rabbis have suggested that anytime you say God's name in prayer, you're standing up. And the reason I say it is when we do Baruch Atah Adonai in the Amidah, it's Baruch Atah Adonai. You have to be standing straight by the time you get to Adonai.
But since this is a communal prayer, could it be referring to both the impression and exile?
Sure. I think there's a sermon there somewhere. Yes. Yes. The answer is yes. There's lots of tiers and layers and that can be pulled out of this, for sure. And the rabbis were in exile, so absolutely. There is a sense here of also in these blessings of imitating God on 103 again, towards where it says imitating God on the left. Someone want to read this nice and loudly? Sarah. So Eric, kind of like what you've just said, there's always another tier that's underlying this. So in one sense, you're saying to God, thank you for giving me all these gifts. And then underlying that is also a message of, now I have to make sure others have the same things. Yes, that's what it means truly to be B'Tselem Elohim is not clear. But yes, Jewish tradition is interpreted in 900 ways, including this is what it means, to help others, to have the power. to help others. I might offer a different one as well, because if you look in the verse in Genesis where it says made in the image of God, if you put a comma after that, the next phrase is to rule over the animals of. In other words, to be in God's image means to control the environment, to control the world in which we live. But that's not the only way to understand it. And this could be subsumed in that as well. Okay? All right. Let's go to the next one. Who stretches out the earth over the waters. When you get out of bed in the morning, you do not fall into the ocean. Okay, that's good news, even on a cruise ship. All right, by nature, water spreads through, all right, and you end up with water and dirt ends up mud. 3/4 of the earth is water. 1/4 is land, and yet the water is kept at bay by land. Usually, right? Except in use in on occasional events, right? The water is kept at bay. And so there's an appreciation of the fact that nature works in such a way that we actually can live. We can predict certain things. Even with hurricanes at this point, we have the ability to predict they're coming through, except last Friday. A week ago Friday, right? Right. Normally, we have the ability to predict the disasters that are coming, and we can adapt to them. When we get up in the morning and you get out of bed, there's an appreciation that nature works. Rokaha aretz al hamayim, who spreads the land on the water. It also alludes to the creation story where God separates water from land. On page 104, in the middle of the page, who stretches the earth. Genesis depicts dry land being formed from the splitting of the primal waters. Now, this definitely requires an explanation. What the heck? The way the ancients understood the world, and their science wasn't great, but it was their best way of making sense, is there was a rakia. There's a term in the second day of creation, there's a rakia. There is a dome that exists over the earth. That dome, number one, the sun during the day rolls across it. Where does it go at night? They didn't know, from the earth and whatever. It went through a door in the dome, rolled across the other side of the dome, and in the morning came through it again. There it was again. Now, again, questionable science, but that's how they made sense. But in addition, how they made sense is what else is above the dome? Water. Rain. And it doesn't rain all the time. It rains when we need it, most of the time. And so what God was doing with this dome was separating the waters above from the waters below. This was their attempt to make sense of the world in which they lived. Okay? Okay, but it really, when you say that, in a sense, the underlying message, which is still true, obviously the science doesn't work, but the message of the world is organized in such a way that we can function is what is being addressed here. The world happens in predictable patterns. Seasons are predictable. We know that winter will follow fall, which follows summer, which follows spring, and the same sequence every year. If that's not true, you can't plant. There's no food. How do you, if the seasons don't happen in sequence, you have no food. And that's how famines start, when things are out of sequence. But the world generally works in a predictable manner. And that's what's being addressed. Really, when they're talking about separating waters and waters, science isn't what's relevant here. I'm sorry? Except for Jesus. Sorry. That is correct. That is correct. Yeah. That's what I said. You don't get out of bed and fall into the ocean. Right. Exactly.
But God is willing all of this every day.
Right.
They did not believe in scientific laws. God was willing.
They didn't know from scientific laws, to be fair. I mean, they didn't know from such. Yeah, right. But I would say to you, even with scientific laws, one can still see God as the source of scientific laws. It doesn't negate God's role.
No question. But this was actually something that developed, actually over beyond 2,000 years. Those science law.
I mean, primarily since the Enlightenment. Yeah, but yes.
Primarily since the Enlightenment.
Right.
God is a lot straighter.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many prayers where, God is constantly acting in the world and making this happen.
Yes, and you're right. God is in the Jewish perspective, God is active in the world. We are not deists. We're not believers that God created the world and stepped out and just said go. We believe in some way. That doesn't mean God's involved in every single act, but God's involved in the laws of nature per se to make sure that man has what man needs. Okay? All right. The next one, all right, is, let's see, where do we leave off? We left off, who abandoned waters, steadies our steps, who provides for all my needs. This is sort of the etc. Okay? Who strengthens the people of Israel with courage. This was said when you put on your belt. Why? Because the belt is where you kept your weapons. Very pragmatic. You go into today's world, we don't worry that, most of us don't worry that every day we're going to be attacked. All right? But it's certainly, no matter how bad things are, it's certainly less so than in the past. Think of the Wild West. Sure, okay. All right. I'm going to leave the political and to the side. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave that to the side, and everybody has different opinions on that. But the reality of it is, people died far more frequently when they went out in the streets in the ancient world than they do percentage-wise than they do today. Okay. There's a much greater chance you're coming home. Okay. Then you get to Oter Yisrael Batifara, who how do they translate it? Crowns, okay, who crowns the people of Israel with glory Batiferet. And this was said as you covered your head. It's also an allusion to tefillin, which are often referred to as a tiferet, as a wonder. So in one way or another, it's either when you put a kippah on, it's when you put on your tefillin. It was, again, the morning routines are being reflected here. And the last one everybody can relate to, Anoten Li'ayv Koach, who gives strength to the weary. All of us are still saying, I hate my alarm clock. Plain and simply, I wish it would go away. Right. One would think that. The only thing, I cannot speak to the reason for the sequence. I'm thinking that even as you're putting the tefillin on in the morning, people, if you've ever been to a morning minyan, you're seeing people, even with their tefillin on, still yawning. Right? And that's kind of like they haven't quite gotten there yet. It's one last, oh yeah. Okay? Is that right? No, I can't tell you that's right. I'm throwing out my ideas on it. Right. All right. Yeah. Right. And the good thing is, with the sequence of orders, the drashes available to us are unlimited. Yeah, here, go ahead. Yes. That one is not said out loud, but yes, exactly. Exactly. So you have here this series of 15 Baruch Atahs. And first of all, there's a power. If you've ever you go to service, you hear Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech, and over and over. There's a power to that recitation. It's almost like a mantra in how it's being presented. So that alone has power. It also helps us this series of 15 helps us towards the goal that was set out by Rabbi Meir in the 2nd century, that we are supposed to say 100 blessings every single day. Now let me tell you how you get there. Okay. The opening blessings right here, 15. 85 left. Okay. The Amidah has 19, and we say 3 amidot a day. That's 57 more. We're now up to 75. 25 left. If you do Birkat HaMazon 3 times a day, there's 4 blessings in there. Well, there's 12 more. We had 80. What we have? We had 75. We're up to 87. In the daily, is that right? 57 and 15, 72, and 12, 84. Okay? I knew something was wrong. And then in the rest of the service, there's blessings of creation, redemption, revelation. There's 10 more blessings in the course of the day that are built into the service. You're up, by doing the services in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and Birkat HaMazon, you are now up to 94 before you do anything else. That leaves you 6 other opportunities in the course of the day. You go look for ways to bless God. Well, but yes, you say a blessing over the food you're going to eat. Right, exactly. But 6 more blessings a day and you get to 100. So the rabbis built in a system to get to that 100. What if you're incapable? So again, this sense of illiteracy is really important. This Rabbi Amram in the 8th century, who was responsible for some of the earliest prayer books, made it customary for the reader, the leader, to say the blessings out loud so that people could say Amen, and in so doing fulfill their obligations to say the 100 blessings a day. And so we say, every time somebody says a blessing, what's your automatic response? I agree. Amen. That's why you don't say Amen to your own blessing. You don't agree with yourself. Okay? It's an I agree is the essential message of what's going on. The reader responds with Amen. Okay, and so you fulfill your blessing. Reading number 3 then asks a certain kind of question, and so let it speak for itself. Do we have a reader? Wendy, nice and loud. Yes. Right. So therefore, if tzedakah is a commandment and everyone else is also, the world does tzedakah. We're not unique in that sense. But if everyone else does it, it no longer serves as that distinguishing sanctification. Yes. All right. Look, again, one of the key facts here that he said is, in my opinion. Okay, that's a key. What he's responding to is some kind of discussion is going on. And so this would be a great conversation unto itself, because he is responding to a conversation that preceded it. Okay, but it is definitely a worthwhile thought in terms of when and where we say brachot and for what purpose. Okay, so I am going to stop there. There's more to the Pesukei de Zimra, and we'll continue on. Jerry. Just, you need to speak up. I'm trying to understand what the underlying question is. Mm-hmm. If you were in a cave, what would it be like? I don't know that I have an answer. And obviously Maimonides suggested that it should be done in the order that you do it in the morning, and it's done at home. It wasn't done in the synagogue until a later point. What was the logic when they centralized it for the illiterate and therefore made a common sequence? I'm not sure I have an absolute answer. I will tell you I didn't come across one either in my research. So my instinct is that no one's really sure. Doesn't mean that's accurate, but I didn't come across any of that in reading. And so, again, it becomes an opportunity to look at the text and struggle with it and try and figure it out. Again, that's part of the game, all right? It's not, everything is not, a lot of it is clear. You understand the intent. You understand what they're saying. Sometimes, just like the Bible, there's an open little arc in the circle that's missing, and you have to put you into it. All right? Maybe that may be a cop-out, and I recognize that, but I do think there's a conversation that it leads to, and that alone has value. Yeah. No, the blessings were, but the sequence wasn't until the 8th century. And yeah. Right. They emerged during a time of Roman times, and the rabbis were trying to make it, for them, very contemporary. They weren't trying to project back to caveman time. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay. Yes, and. Yes, and. Okay. Yes, and. Right, and you're 100% right. But that's what the Siddur is. By putting it in writing, you don't have to use the word mandating. You create the ritual. That is. But why did they put it in the sequence they did? We don't know. That's a different question. But you're right. The Siddur, once the printing press particularly comes out, and everybody has it in front of them, by definition, you've created law by putting it in writing. Right. Interesting. And yeah, that'd be interesting to take a look at. Yeah, different Siddurim have them in different orders. Okay. Yeah. So to that, those that disappeared, the answer is we don't know. Those that we have the Talmud, we still have. Do we know, however, that the Talmud that we have is in full what was had prior to the censorship? We don't know. The records of the Middle Ages, particularly until the printing press, are very sporadic at best. There's a lack of information. I mean, it's from the Christian world, they'll call it, a lot of it as the Dark Ages. For Jews, it wasn't so much the Dark Ages, except in the Ashkenazic community. In the Sephardic community, it was the Golden Age. And you're next. Of what? So I'm not enough of an expert to tell you about the Talmud on that. I can tell you in the prayer book, absolutely. So, for example, as recently as about 150 years ago, the Aleinu had another verse. The Aleinu contained a verse that said, they who, thank you for not making us like those who bow to gods of worship, of nothingness, who cannot save them. How do you think the Christians heard that one? So guess what verse is not there anymore? And just in case you don't believe me, look in the Encyclopedia Judaica. There's an entire article about it. Yeah, Russ. Well, the Talmud existed well, you had Jerusalem and the Babylonian, yeah, but the Babylonian Talmud which we use was written in Babylonia, which was under Islamic. Well, no, it was under Persian rule, all right? And then Islam conquered in the 600s. No. No, the answer is no. Jews under Islamic rule had a very different relationship for a lot of reasons. Number one, in the Christian world, the only minority in the Christian world were the Jews. They just basically converted everybody else. In the Islamic world, there were many minorities, including Christians and Jews, etc. And so there wasn't necessarily a targeting of Jews in the same way. They were in the collective of minorities. It's unclear. It's unclear because that Talmud made its way to, by the time you get to the 13th century, the 12th and 13th century, much of the scholarship is happening in the Ashkenazic world, just post-Maimonides, okay? And so the Talmud that we had was in their hands, and they're the ones who got persecuted. So and there weren't, keep in mind, we're thinking printing press. Everybody walked in and had a book. That's not the way the world worked. There were 25 of them. There were 50 of them. There were 75 in the world, whatever it is. What survived? Okay, go for it.
I had a
Whoa!
I had a question about the Cairo Geniza and how much that did or didn't contribute to the records of Talmudic text from that era. If that was like too far past the times that you're referring to, or...
So the Cairo Geniza, which was found in the early 1900s by Solomon Schechter, contributed greatly. I mean, we had no idea, none about a lot of everything I've presented, a lot of what we know about the history of the world, they had none, zero idea about what happened through much of history until the Cairo Geniza. So whatever we now have is probably a result of those findings, but it's still incomplete. Right. We found the Ashrei is an acrostic, okay, meaning it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If you have an acrostic and there's an N missing, okay, you realize something's wrong. Of course, that's not how the rabbis interpret it. In the Ashrei, you're missing a nun. There's no nun. There's a verse with every single letter of the alphabet except the nun. So the rabbis said, okay, why is there no nun? There's no nun because the word stands for nifilah, fallen, and we never want to reference God in any way as fallen. So let's not have a verse with a nun. And then along comes the Cairo Geniza, and they find a version of the Ashrei, and there's a nun in it. Ne'eman, faithful. Somebody made a scribal error 2,000 years ago. And it just got lost. Simply got lost. It's real human. The reality of it is it's real human actions and events. Piyutim are poems from the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. Not Yanni as in the musician. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right, so part of the problem is you say, what don't we have? And the answer is, oftentimes we don't know what we don't have. Right? It's like, how do you discover the null set? So that is a problem. Sometimes we recover it in something like the Cairo Geniza, and God only knows what else we'll recover over as we do more excavation. But right now, we don't know what we don't know. And there are a lot of holes in history. A professor I'm working with right now, it just blew me away when he was talking to me. He said, you know, when we read about the European groups in Germany and France and in the Middle Ages and all the communities, he says, we're talking about communities of less than 10. They couldn't even get a minyan. It's not what we're thinking. Okay? They had 7 towns would form a little organization because each town had nothing for themselves. So it's not, we have to keep in mind as we read back on history, we tend to project our own realities onto them. All right, enough said. I've killed enough of your day. And we'll continue next week on next Sunday morning. Thank you all.